We are literally standing on the edge of humanity's greatest adventure yet, becoming a multiplanetary species. But, you know, the sheer logistical, engineering, and financial scope of actually pushing humanity toward Mars, it is absolutely staggering. So today in this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly how we plan to get there and really map out the competing blueprints for our future in space. Here's a quick look at our roadmap. We'll be going over the multiplanetary dream, traditional exploration architectures, the Starship Plan, a direct comparison of those architectures, and finally, the new space race. But hey, before we even think about Mars, we kind of have to look closer to home. Who is actually best positioned to return humans to the moon first? And more importantly, why does it even matter? Well, it matters because the moon is our stepping stone. Overcoming the crazy logistical hurdles of deep space exploration is arguably the ultimate modern challenge. The frameworks we're building for the moon today are absolutely going to dictate who reaches Mars tomorrow. Now, before we get completely buried in payloads and propulsion systems, let's ground all this technical data in human ambition. There's a great quote from Elon Musk. You want to wake up in the morning and think the future is going to be great. It's about believing in the future and thinking that the future will be better than the past. You see, these abstract goals of space exploration, they represent a really profound optimism. It's about believing in a multiplanetary civilization. This isn't just about rocks and rockets. It is about fundamentally expanding the human experience. All right, part one, the multiplanetary dream. Why is Mars our primary target? Let's look at Mars's unique profile. Yes, it is an average of 140 million miles away. That's a massive hostile gap for sure. But look at the day length, 24 hours and 40 minutes. That is remarkably close to Earth's. It also has 38% of Earth's gravity, which means you could lift heavy equipment pretty easily. And crucially, it's got a CO2-rich atmosphere. With compression, we can actually grow plants there. So it's incredibly challenging, yet uniquely hospitable compared to literally anywhere else we could realistically go. Moving on to Section 2, Traditional Exploration Architectures. Let's look at how governments have historically planned to cross that 140 million mile gap. When you look at NASA's Moon to Mars strategy, it's built on a foundation of interlocking pillars. They take a very methodical, value-driven approach. They really have to balance scientific discovery, public inspiration, and national posture all at once. Because they're a publicly funded agency, their architecture isn't just about pure speed, right? It's about maintaining a sustainable, politically viable consensus over decades. And because of those strict requirements, traditional missions are phased and highly complex. According to benchmarking studies from MIT, a standard government Mars architecture breaks down into 6 key phases. First, you pre-deploy cargo. Then you have a cislunar rendezvous near the moon. Then the actual transit to a Mars rendezvous. Maybe even a visit to a moon like Phobos. And for the return, you rely on a completely separate, pre-deployed ascent stage and another pre-deployed return vehicle. It's like this massive, high-stakes relay race where every single link in the chain has to work perfectly. To facilitate this massive orbital ballet, NASA and its international partners are building the Lunar Gateway. Planned for its first launch in 2028, this is really the centerpiece of the traditional cislunar architecture. Notice how it's built. It's modular. It's put together piece by piece, over time, much like the International Space Station. It requires multiple launches and intense orbital assembly just to create a staging ground for the next leg of the journey. Which brings us to Section 3, the Starship Plan. What if we could bypass all that modular assembly entirely? 100 metric tons. I want you to just let that massive number sink in for a second. This is Starship's orbital payload capability in a fully reusable configuration. To put that in perspective, this completely redefines the mass and volume of what can be launched into space in a single trip. It literally changes the fundamental math of space travel. So how does this actually translate into a mission plan? Well, the Starship architecture relies on a few really disruptive tactics. First, the vehicle is fully and rapidly reusable. Second, and honestly, this is the real game changer, it's powered by ISRU, or In Situ Resource Utilization. That means instead of dragging all the fuel for the trip home all the way from Earth, or relying on those complex pre-deployed ascent stages we talked about, Starship uses liquid methane and oxygen that can literally be mined and refined right on the surface of Mars. With cargo flights targeted for no earlier than 2028, SpaceX is aiming for a paradigm-shifting cost of just $100 million per metric ton to Mars. Okay, Section 4, Comparing the Architectures. Let's bring these two vastly different philosophies together for a direct comparison. The physical contrast here is just wild. The Gateway space station, which again requires multiple international launches to assemble, provides roughly 4,500 cubic feet of habitable volume. A single Starship? Approximately 35,000 cubic feet. That is roughly the internal volume of a 747 jumbo jet. One single commercial vehicle vastly outpaces the entire modular volume of the government station. When you put these plans head to head, the core differences become super clear. On one side, you have the traditional route using the Space Launch System and Gateway. We're talking roughly $4 billion per flight, modular construction in orbit, and a mandatory pre-deployed ascent stage for coming home. It's highly tested, heavily overseen, and very risk-averse. On the flip side, the Starship Plan promises massive cost reductions, relies on a single massive reusable vehicle instead of orbital assembly, and uses direct return via Mars refueling. It is an incredibly high-risk, high-reward commercial approach.
Finally, Section 5, the new space race. Because as we all know, engineering doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Observers who track the space industry are pointing out a pretty major geopolitical debate going on right now. They note that China's space agency operates with what's being called China's speed, essentially treating space exploration as a high-priority, well-funded national defense program. Meanwhile, NASA is often required to spread contracts across various congressional districts to secure its funding, which, as public forums often point out, can hobble designs with politics and bureaucracy. There's this real friction between efficient state-mandated speed and the slower democratic oversight of U.S. government programs. So, how is NASA adapting to survive this new space race? Well, they're utilizing programs like CLPS, or Commercial Lunar Payload Services. This effectively shifts NASA away from solely relying on expensive, government-built rockets, and instead uses fixed-price service contracts with commercial providers. NASA is heavily leaning into public-private partnerships, relying on commercial disruptors to cut through the red tape, drive down those costs, and seriously increase the frequency of missions. Which brings us to the big question I want to leave you with today. Will blending traditional government oversight with the sheer disruptive power of commercial vehicles like Starship ultimately be the key to securing humanity's multiplanetary future? We are looking at a delicate, incredibly high-stakes balance of innovation, risk, and fierce international competition. We are literally watching the blueprints for our future being drawn in real time. The only question now is, whose blueprint is going to get us there first?